For 17 days, the world watched press conferences, Pentagon briefings, and official statements from American and Israeli defense officials describing a singular narrative. Iran was running out of missiles. The campaign was working. The capability was degrading. The end was approaching. Then, an IRGC spokesperson walked to a microphone, looked directly into a camera, and said something that should have stopped every one of those briefings in its tracks. He said it calmly. He said it publicly. He said it on Iranian state television, where every intelligence service, every defense ministry, and every news organization on earth could access it within the hour. He said the missiles Iran had been firing for 17 days were from a decade ago, and then he said the sentence that changes everything about this conflict, both retroactively and going forward. Iran has not yet fired the missiles produced since the 12-day war with Israel. Not some of them, not most of them, has not yet fired them. Stay with this analysis for the next several minutes, because what that IRGC spokesperson just confirmed publicly, what it means for 17 days of military operations, what it means for every capability degradation claim that has been made, and what it means for the phase of this conflict that no Western briefing room is currently preparing the public to understand, is the story that reframes everything. Every strike, every press conference, every degraded capability claim, every mission accomplished implication, all of it reframed by one sentence from one man in a uniform on Iranian state television. Welcome to the Global Brief, where we cut through official narratives and analyze the geopolitical and military developments that shape our world with the depth and precision those developments actually deserve. 17 days of official narrative. To understand what the IRGC spokesperson just dismantled, you first need to understand exactly what he dismantled. On day one of this conflict, the IDF announced the destruction of 300 Iranian missile launchers in the opening strike package. Pentagon briefing cited significant degradation of Iranian launch capability. Officials described the opening salvo as targeting the core infrastructure of Iran's ballistic missile program. The launchers, the storage facilities, the command systems, the logistics networks that move missiles from production to deployment. By day 4, American officials described Iranian fire as substantially reduced from initial projections. The assessment held that Iranian launch capacity had been degraded enough to meaningfully reduce the threat to Israeli cities and American bases in the region. The language of decisive, rapid resolution began circulating in official communications. By day 7, Pentagon briefings cited the destruction of a significant percentage of Iranian missile infrastructure. Reports described Iranian fire as declining from peak levels. The narrative was consolidating around a specific story. Overwhelming American and Israeli force was systematically dismantling Iran's ability to sustain the campaign it had opened. By day 10, Israeli officials described roughly 75% of Iranian launch capability as destroyed or degraded. The language of mission nearly accomplished began appearing in briefings that had previously been more cautious. Markets moved on the assessment. Oil prices responded to the implied trajectory toward resolution. By day 14, the missile fire rate from Iran had dropped approximately 90%, from a peak of 350 launches on February 28th down to roughly 25 launches per day. Every analyst, every briefing, every market response treated that 90% reduction as confirmation of the degradation narrative. Iran was running out, the campaign was working, the end was approaching, and then came day 17. The IRGC spokesperson clarified what that 90% reduction actually meant. Iran was not running out of missiles. Iran was running out of decade-old missiles. The missiles being conserved, the ones that have not yet been fired, are an entirely different inventory, built after the last conflict, incorporating the lessons of every previous engagement Iran has studied, designed against the specific defensive architecture that America and Israel deployed in this war, stored in locations that the targeting intelligence driving this campaign was never built to find, because that intelligence was built around the old inventory. 17 days of degradation claims, 17 days of capability assessments, 17 days of a victory narrative built on the assumption that what Iran was firing was what Iran had. It was not what Iran had. It was what Iran was willing to spend. what Iran has been building for a decade. Understanding what has not been fired requires understanding how much of it exists. Iran's ballistic missile program has operated under international sanctions for its entire history. It has never had access to Western precision manufacturing equipment. It has never been able to import the components that American or European missile manufacturers take for granted. It has built everything it possesses under maximum external pressure, with domestic production capacity and assistance from partners that the international community has tried and largely failed to prevent. Under those conditions, in the decade since the previous conflict the IRGC spokesperson referenced, Iran has produced and deployed the following. The Fatah, a hypersonic missile capable of Mach 15 maneuverable in terminal phase with characteristics designed to bypass every American air defense system currently deployed in this region. Iran announced it in 2023. Western analysts debated its capabilities. Its production numbers were assessed as limited, a handful, perhaps a dozen operational units. Those assessments were made by analysts studying Iran's old production infrastructure against old capability benchmarks. The Khaybar-Shikan, a solid-fuel ballistic missile with a 2,000-kilometer range, and a maneuvering re-entry vehicle designed specifically to defeat Patriot and Arrow intercept systems through unpredictable terminal phase behavior. Iran announced it in 2022. Production numbers were again assessed as limited. The Imad, the Ghadr, the Sejil, each representing successive generations of Iranian ballistic missile development, each more capable than the Shahab 3 variants that Iran has been firing for 17 days and that Western analysts have been describing as Iran's missile capability. Here's the critical question that the IRGC spokesperson's statement forces into the open. If Iran's old inventory, decade-old Shahab 3 variants and early production EMADs produced 350 launches on day one and sustained fire for 17 days, what does a new inventory of Fatah hypersonics, updated Khaybar-Shikans and Sejils with modernized guidance systems produce in terms of launch volume and target penetration capability against a defensive architecture that has spent 17 days depleting its interceptor stockpile against the old weapons? The Iron Dome and David's Sling systems that have been firing multi-million-dollar interceptors at far less expensive decade-old missiles for 17 days have finite inventories. Israel has already communicated to American officials that interceptor reserves are critically low. Patriot batteries operating at sustained high intercept rates for over 2 weeks are working with ammunition reserves that were not designed for 3-week high-intensity campaigns. The new missiles have not yet been fired against a defensive system already exhausted from fighting the old ones. That is the operational picture the IRGC spokesperson described, not as a threat, as a statement of fact. 3 audiences, 1 statement. The IRGC spokesperson was not speaking to a single audience, he was speaking to all of them simultaneously. Each hears a different sentence. To the Iranian domestic audience, the sentence is, "We have not been defeated." The narrative that American and Israeli officials have been constructing, capability degraded, stockpile depleted, Iran on its knees, is false. What you have been watching for 17 days is Iran spending its oldest weapons while protecting its newest ones. The real campaign has not started yet. Your government is not losing. Your government is waiting. To the Israeli public, the statement is the most alarming thing any Iranian official has said since this conflict began. Because the Israeli public has been living for 17 days under the assumption that the interceptors being fired at incoming missiles were depleting Iranian capability at the same time they were depleting Israeli reserves. The arithmetic was painful, but it had an implied endpoint. Eventually, Iran runs out too. The IRGC spokesperson just told them the endpoint they were counting toward was never real. Iran's real inventory is intact. Israel's interceptors are not. To the American defense establishment, the statement is an intelligence failure of the first order. Every targeting package, every strike assessment, every capability degradation claim for 17 days was built on intelligence about an inventory that Iran was voluntarily spending while protecting a different inventory entirely. The intelligence community assessed what it could see. Iran showed it what Iran wanted it to see. The actual capability, the decade of new production, the Fatah stockpile, the updated Khaybar-Shikan inventory, was in storage in hardened facilities in locations that a targeting campaign focused on decade-old infrastructure was structurally not positioned to find. To global financial markets, the statement is the closure of the exit door that analysts had been pricing into oil futures for 3 days. Every movement toward $90 oil, every easing of war risk premiums, every analyst note suggesting the conflict was approaching resolution was premised on the degradation narrative the IRGC just invalidated. The strait remains closed. The interceptors are still depleting, and the missiles that have not yet been fired are the ones that make everything currently deployed look like an opening act. Reframing every official statement, here is the precise shape of what every official American and Israeli statement about Iranian missile capability has been for 17 days, and what each statement looks like now that the IRGC spokesperson has provided the context those statements were missing. Statement: the IDF has destroyed 300 Iranian missile launchers. Context: 300 launchers designed for decade-old Shahab-3 variants. The launchers for the new inventory, the Fatah mobile platforms, the K-bar Shaykan deployment infrastructure, were either not in the targeting package or were in hardened facilities that the strike packages did not successfully penetrate. Destroying 300 launchers for weapons Iran was already treating as expendable is not capability degradation, it is clearing old stock. Statement: Iranian fire has declined 90% from peak levels. Context: Iran fired 350 missiles on day 1. By day 14, Iran was firing approximately 25 per day. That 90% reduction was interpreted universally as depletion. It was rationing. Iran reduced its fire rate as its old inventory approached exhaustion, and its new inventory remained in storage. The 90% reduction is not evidence that Iran has fewer missiles than it started with. It is evidence that Iran has finished spending the missiles it was willing to spend. Statement: 75% of Iranian launch capability has been destroyed or degraded. Context: 75% of the launch capability associated with the old inventory. The launch capability associated with the new inventory, the decade of production since the previous conflict, was never in the assessment because it was never in the targeting intelligence, because it was stored in locations that the old infrastructure maps did not include. Statement: Iran is running out of missiles. Context: the IRGC spokesperson, on camera, on the record, on Iranian state television. We have not yet fired the missiles produced since the 12-day war with Israel. The gap between each official statement and its actual context is not a gap of interpretation. It is a gap of fundamental intelligence failure about the most important single variable in this conflict, what Iran actually has versus what Iran has been willing to reveal, how Russia and China are reading this. Russia's military intelligence directorate issued an internal assessment that was partially leaked to Russian defense media within 24 hours of the IRGC spokesperson's statement. The assessment described the admission as consistent with Russian analysis of Iranian production capacity over the past decade, and noted that Western assessments of Iranian missile inventory had systematically underestimated the scale of new production by treating announced capabilities as total capabilities. That sentence is the intelligence community's version of having correctly called a situation that others missed. Russia has been watching Iran build its new inventory for a decade. Russia has been providing some of the technology and manufacturing expertise that made elements of that inventory possible. Russia assessed the new inventory correctly. American targeting intelligence assessed the old inventory instead. Russia's decision to leak its own assessment publicly is not accidental. It is a message to every defense planner in every NATO country who has been building threat models based on the American and Israeli capability degradation claims. Russia is telling them the models are wrong and telling them publicly, because the moment the IRGC spokesperson made his statement, Russia's accurate prior assessment became its own form of strategic leverage. China's response was immediate and commercial. UN-denominated oil futures spiked sharply within hours of the IRGC statement reaching financial markets. Every trader processing the statement arrived at the same conclusion: the exit from this conflict is further away than it was yesterday. The new missiles have not been fired. The interceptors are depleting. The strait is closed. The oil price has further to move. China's energy futures market processed the military intelligence faster and more accurately than any official Western market commentary that followed. What comes next? Here is what Iran's admission means for this conflict from this point forward. It means 17 days of official narrative about Iranian capability degradation needs to be understood as 17 days of Iran managing its expendable inventory while protecting its real one. Every destroyed launcher, every degraded facility, every intercepted missile, all of it was the cost of spending weapons Iran had already decided to spend, while the weapons it was protecting stayed in hardened storage, waiting for the moment the defensive systems opposing them were sufficiently depleted. It means the interceptor shortage Israel has already reported to American officials is not a shortage created by fighting a degraded adversary. It is a shortage created by fighting the opening act, the act designed to cost interceptors, the act designed to exhaust the defense, the act that comes before the missiles that have not been fired yet. It means every timeline, every projection, every assessment of when this conflict reaches its conclusion needs to be reset, not revised, reset from the beginning based on the actual inventory rather than the visible one. And it means that somewhere in the storage facilities that 17 days of airstrikes did not find because the targeting intelligence was looking at the wrong map, the missiles produced in the decades since Iran's last major conflict are waiting, fueled, targeted, held in reserve by a military command that spent 17 days telling the world everything it was willing to lose while protecting everything it was not. America celebrated the degradation of a stockpile Iran was spending deliberately. Israel depleted its interceptors against weapons Iran considered expendable. The Gulf states absorbed 17 days of strikes from an inventory Iran treated as disposable. And then the IRGC spokesperson walked to a microphone and told the world what comes next is what Iran has been protecting since the first missile of this war was fired. The old missiles are spent. The new ones are waiting. And the defensive systems that were supposed to stop them have been counting down toward depletion for 17 days. The admission is not a boast, it is a warning. And it is the most strategically significant sentence anyone has said publicly since this conflict began. At the Global Brief, we will continue tracking how this development reshapes the strategic calculus of every party involved as new information emerges. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of what is actually unfolding, share it with someone who is following this conflict. Because the gap between the official narrative and operational reality is now wider than at any point since fighting began. This analysis is based on publicly available statements, defense reporting, and geopolitical assessment. It does not constitute intelligence reporting or official government analysis. Viewers are encouraged to consult multiple credible sources when forming their own assessments of ongoing conflicts.